Good evening, my humble acolytes. Since the latter half of last year, Mordheim's popularity has absolutely exploded. Wait a minute. What the hell is a Mordheim? Mordheim is a grimdark skirmish game set in the blood-soaked streets of a town overrun by mutants and demons, where gangs of scumbags fight over shards of magic rocks that grant the bearer either sorceress abilities or a one-way ticket to the world's worst deterror trip imaginable. Now, unless you've been living under a rock since October of 2022, it would seem that every hobby influencer here on YouTube has put out their own video of why Mordheim is the best game ever. Yes. These videos have been accompanied with little to no follow-up on the subject matter. Like I'm one to talk. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with this, but outside a general overview of the game, the tutorial pickings are slim at best and non-existent at worst. This leaves me to believe that everyone is chasing that oh-so-sweet ad revenue, or the HobbyTube community is engaged in some esoteric Mordheim underground invite-only gaming events with an omerta-level code of silence.
The first rule of Fight Club is, you do not talk about Fight Club.
However, personally, I can see Eric's Hobby Workshop going to Fight Club. Just saying. Someone that I feel is doing an amazing job of adding to the overall Mordheim conversation is my friend and fellow black metal connoisseur, Alessandro of Dark Ages Workshop. He, in partnership with the Grimdark Compendium, has been working on a 12-part Mordheim documentary, which not only talks about the history, mechanics, and artistic influences of the game, but also covers the design philosophy behind kitbashing and painting each of the 8 warbands of the base game. A titanic undertaking, to say the least. You gotta check it out. It's a great series. And it puts hair on your chest and makes you more desirable to the opposite sex. Mileage may vary. Now, while the actual poltergeist known as Games Workshop discontinued the game in the early 2000s, Mordheim, as mentioned prior, still not only has a thriving community, but a growing one that is constantly adding expansions to the existing rules and warbands and holding their own international Mordheim tournaments. The game has been going through its own renaissance, so if you missed the original release, now is the perfect time to get into it. Plus, all the rules and expansions are free, I'll say it again, free on broheim.net.
Hot diggity dog! This place is magnificent.
Huh, it's like you could actually grow a game system without charging for the rulebooks. Imagine that.
No way!
Not to mention, Mordheim is also extremely popular within the heresy community. That is because we are players of class and impeccable taste. Except for Space Wolf players and anyone that runs the Fury of the Ancients army list.
Bruh.
So after some careful planning that quickly went out the window, more on that struggle later, and allured by the spirit of the spooky Halloween season at the time, I embarked on my own quest to build and paint my own warband of villainous degenerates. So with my opening treatise at a close, I humbly invite you to grab your lament configuration, rev up your chainsaw arms, and tiptoe through the tulips with me to Mordheim, City of the Damned.
Groovy.
So the first question on everyone's mind is, Nero, how the hell are you going to paint an entire warband when it takes you an eternity to paint one model? Great question. And what I'm still trying to answer. Second question is, how are you going to build a warband for an out-of-print game? First, we have to take a closer look at the setting itself. Mordheim takes place in the aforementioned city that got KO'd by a comet. One primary objective of the game is to fight over and gather Wordstone, which is magic made manifest in rock form. This can turn your mild-mannered neighbor into a spellcaster and make wizards more, well, wizardly. The game explores the weirder and darker side of the old Warhammer Fantasy Battle setting, focusing not on large armies, but small groups of ne'er-do-wells and deranged adventurers attempting to plunder the carcass of the once thriving city of Mordheim.
An embarrassment of riches, as they say.
Basically the Inquisitor of Warhammer Fantasy Battles. In the lead up to this project, I spoke at length with Dark Ages Workshop on how to approach the setting with the appropriate mindset. A great piece of advice that he gave me was that a good way to approach the warbands of Mordheim is to view them as archetypes to put your own creative spin on, and where appropriate, add outside elements to. The warbands listed in the rules are more or less guidelines for a gang of troops that behave a certain way or do a certain thing. Apart from these details, the game encourages you to swing for the fences in terms of creativity, much like the developers and artists did behind the IP when they were creating the setting. My first army I ever collected was Chaos Mortals for Warhammer Fantasy Battles. Just the absolute best. So naturally, my first Mordheim warband is going to be their in-game counterpart, the Cult of the Possessed. Great, we have a warband. So who are they?
Explorers in the further regions of experience. Demons to some, angels to others.
That is actually a pretty accurate description. The Cults of the Possessed are the foulest of chaos-worshipping maniacs. Their ranks are home to mutants, beastmen, and yes, warriors possessed by warp entities.
I'll swallow your soul!
Think of them as if you took a blender, tossed in the Xenobites from Hellraiser, the Villagers from Apostle, and Alex and his Droogs from A Clockwork Orange.
Happy Polylodges.
These Chaos Cults have come to Mordheim to pledge their fealty to the Shadow Lord. Who or what is the Shadow Lord, you ask? Well, my dear acolytes, none can say. I mean, the cults themselves don't even know whether this being is a demon or some mortal idiot that the Chaos Gods have collectively propped up as their emissary in the region. As players, this provides a nice backdrop for inspiration to inform the look of our warband and what the Shadow Lord is to them. For my diabolical degenerates, I turn to one of my favorite avenues for inspiration, the twisted mind of H.P. Lovecraft. More specifically, the being within the Lovecraftian mythos known as the King in Yellow. I think a Chaos Warband in yellow robes is a nice break from what we typically see in the Warhammer IP. So we're going to roll with that. Alongside this, my other source of inspiration comes courtesy from Mike Franchina and the amazing artwork he is doing for Trench Crusade, which is an IP of his own creation. Something that I will be examining in a future project. A little bit of foreshadowing. The chaos heretics of this world are beautifully hideous. I mean, seriously, this is the definition of nightmare fuel. Look at this guy. This is crazy. These pieces of art will help me go about how I address the exposed flesh of my chaos cultists. With both Mike's artwork and Lovecraft's mythos, there's a focus on the aquatic, the bizarre and frightening world of undersea life. I like the idea of my cultists hailing from decrepit nearby fishing towns, whose docks or ports have fallen into decay or ruin, or whose waters were poisoned after the Warpstone comet struck Mordheim proper. Now that our Faustian pact with the Dark Gods is set in stone, I had to go about choosing which models to use for an out-of-print game. If you have access to a trust fund and want to flex on the pores, you could always try and hunt down the actual discontinued white metal models. But that isn't a viable option for the rest of us peasants, so we will have to turn to contemporary sources. GW does have a wide selection of miniatures to choose from for a Mordheim warband. However, Mordheim had a unique aesthetic that the game really did everything in its power to cultivate. In contrast to this, many of the miniatures in GW's fantasy line fall well outside the bleak nature of the Mordheim setting, opting for a lame high fantasy look. So, to remedy this, I'll be using both GW and third-party miniatures, most of which will be converted to some extent, as I am aiming to mirror the established aesthetic in the original artwork found in the Mordheim rulebook. Basically, a lot of scuffed guys wearing capriote hoods. I'll also be cutting away and removing a lot of the overly excessive details, specifically on the GW models. This is to aid with the low fantasy look we are going for. Hopefully, these actions will help me achieve an update to the classic look of the Cult of the Possessed warband. In Mordheim, there are two types of units: heroes and cannon fodder. I mean henchmen. For this project, I'll be creating one of each of the hero units and 3 of each of the henchmen units. While this warband isn't points legal per se, my goal with these lads is to have enough unit options to field while playing games with friends or in tournaments. This way, I could scale the warband accordingly. Let's get started with the lowly henchmen. Alright, first on deck we have the Brethren, who are your basic fanatics and human disciples of the cult. They don't have much in the way of arms and armor, relying mostly on whatever they could get their hands on. The models that I am using for the henchmen are from Rotten Factory Miniatures, which is a boutique manufacturer out of Europe. They have that perfect old-school Mordheim look that I'm going for. As a note with these lads, while they are at a 28mm heroic scale, the size of each of the models can vary between miniatures. I actually reached out to Rotten Factory to make sure that this little guy with the musket wasn't a misprint, since he was so much smaller than the other models in my purchase. They got back to me right away and said indeed that model is a little bit smaller than the others because, I quote, "they're a strange strange things afoot in the Rotten Lands. Fair enough. Despite this particular model's smaller stature, he looks great with the rest of the warband. It's like having Tyrion Lannister on the long guns, which, given how abysmal the last couple of seasons of Game of Thrones turned out, is understandable. Anyway, Rotten Factory even offered to refund the model, which was totally not necessary. Like I said, he looks great. I will leave a link to Rotten Factory's website below. Please go check them out. Their models are fantastic and their customer service is on point. As an additional note, I know that the Brethren in Mordheim don't have rifles as a word gear option, but we are going for theme and rule of cool. So long as my opponent knows that he has a ranged weapon, we're good. The only other thing I did with these miniatures was shave down some excessive mutated spikes on this guy's collarbone, as you could see in the background. In addition, I gave him a weapon swap with a sword I found in an old hammer box of Chaos Warriors, just to tie the aesthetic of these third-party miniatures closer to that of Mordheim. So, little to no conversion work at all.
If only the rest of the warband was this simple.
Ugh. You'll see what I mean in a second. Next to our brethren, we have the Dark Souls.
It's not there! It's not there! He's not there!
These guys are the well-armed and well-armored warriors of the cult. This is because they are damned men who have once been under the influence of a demon or warp entity.
Which I guess is the same thing.
In the twisted minds of the rank-and-file cultists, these Dark Souls are seen as holy men and thus deserving of better weapons and armor. The kit I used as a starting point for the Dark Souls was the Chaos Legionnaire set for Warcry by GW. The models themselves reminded me of some of the old Ian Miller artwork found in the various editions of the old Realms of Chaos books. So they seemed like a great choice, right? Wrong. Putting together this kit straight up sucks, a point that I cannot stress enough. For one, the directions on how to assemble these guys are unclear and confusing. Top of that, some of the parts are mislabeled both in the assembly guide and on the damn sprue itself. This is an embarrassingly bad look, even for the likes of Games Workshop, a multi-million-dollar company that claims to make the best miniatures
In the world.
should not under any circumstances be having these sorts of quality control issues. I looked into this matter further to make sure I wasn't going nuts, and sure enough, other hobbyists in the community were encountering the same problems. Again, cool models, but I cannot recommend this kit in good faith to new hobbyists. This kit should only be approached if you have a fair bit of modeling experience under your belt. Funny how the kit I used for the Dark Souls units was just as frustrating as traversing Blighttown in the actual game of Dark Souls. Oh, the irony. As for what I did to these models, I removed a lot of the details on the shoulder pauldrons since I felt they were a little too flashy. In one case, I swapped out the weapon's head for this horrifying pickaxe-looking mace from the Putrid Blight King's kit. This thing looks like a crude machination cobbled together from the assorted weapons that the cult would find in the streets of the cursed city of Mordheim. I also used some putty to cover up some of the chaos runes that were etched into the battle axes. Unless you were playing 5th edition, the magic weapons were scarce in Warhammer Fantasy battles, even more so in Mordheim. After all, these are supposed to be weapons forged by amateurs, not master-crafted blades with otherworldly properties. The last group of henchmen we have are the Beastmen, who are foul combinations of wild animals and men created to serve the dark gods of chaos. As an aside, the Beastmen are always portrayed as being half man, half goat. I think this is a very short-sighted take on an interesting creature. When I think of Beastmen, I think of the description of the Trollocs in Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series, the books, and not whatever the hell this is pretending to be. Jordan describes the Trollocs as being combined with different animals, and not just one in particular. Some of the men are merged with reptiles, birds, and yes, goats. So for my Trollocs, I want them to have different bestial characteristics that set them apart from the crowd. To accomplish this, I turned to the Sangor kit from GW. The models themselves look great with their bird-like maws, interesting bone structure of their horns, and the random tentacle hair featured on some of the sculpts. The assembly was mostly as intended, minus a couple weapon swaps and a shield swap from the Chaos Legionnaire's kit. For the Bannermen, I also used this interesting polearm from the Necromunda Kodor Gang kit. For the moment, I won't go into too much detail on this guy, as he will be the subject matter for a later video. My main issue with the Sangor kit is twofold. The directions aren't great, although not as bad as the Chaos Legionnaires. However, post-assembly, you do have to do a lot of gap filling with green stuff. This again is something that might be off-putting to new hobbyists. Proceed with caution. Outside the basics, I shaved away some of the excess detail on the armor and added some studs to give it that early 90s feel. And with that, our cultist cannon fodder is finished. As with the henchmen, there are 3 types of heroes. The first one is the mutant, whose name implies suffers from, or is blessed, from an assortment of mutations bestowed on them by the dark gods of chaos. These guys come in all shapes and sizes, sporting razor-sharp talons, horns, multiple eyes, or hoofed feet. This is one of those units that definitely opens up some interesting kit-bashing opportunities. For the body of the mutant, I used this hunched-over Cawdor ganger. I replaced his right arm with the obligatory Chaos Crab Claw sourced from the Demonette kit. Next, I turned the model's staff into a scythe using the gift that keeps on giving, bits from the Putrid Blight King's kit. And for the pièce de résistance, I swapped his head for that of the Gaunt Summoner. I loosely wanted to pay homage to the iconic Pale Man in Pan's Labyrinth. And well, would you look at that? I think he turned out pretty cool. He looks like he belongs in the warband, yet adds something different, which is great. Up next, we have the cult leader, or Magistar. This is the head honcho, the master of ceremonies, and more or less supposed to represent you on the tabletop. This unit is not only a capable spellcaster, but, given the right loadout, can excel in melee combat.
Fighting sorcerers are the best.
This conversion is even easier than the one for the mutant. I took the body from the Chaos Sorcerer Lord and replaced both his head and staff with that of the Demigod miniature found in the 40k Dark Commune kit. I gotta say, he's perfect. He's probably my favorite miniature in the entire warband. And for some reason, every time I look at him, I think of Kate Bush's song, Running Up That Hill. Sweet. Lastly, we have the Mac Daddy of Evil, the one from which the warband gets its name, the Tormented Possessed. As the name implies, this is a mortal whose body's found his way onto the renter's market of the Demonicon. Now possessed by a minion of the Primordial Annihilator, this poor sod's body has been twisted and reformed to something his captor deems a little bit more appropriate.
Compared to you humans, I'm on the top rung of the evolutionary ladder.
This unit is also the biggest infantry-sized unit of the game, and should have a formidable stature to go along with this on the tabletop. As you can see in the background, I am using the Gutrot Spume AOS model. Despite the wackadoo name, credit where it's due, this is a fantastic sculpt. The squid-like maw coming out of the bloated stomach fits perfectly with the theme of my warband. This miniature is also huge, which checks the size and scale of the possessed unit. I only added a spike on top of the massive battle axe and gave him a head swap with the head of one of his Blight King brothers. Finished off, of course, with a hood I sculpted from green stuff. And with that, model complete. At this point, I could have stopped here and charged straight into the painting process, but I wanted to add something a little extra. So I got a hold of this freaky manfish thing from the Silver Tower game by GW, and using some plastic rod and a jewelry stud, turned him into a spooky deep-sea anglerfish, or as Mrs. Nero calls him,
The spooklerfish.
I see this little guy as an emissary from the Shadow Lord, guiding the cult to their path of enlightenment. And if anything, he could be used as a really cool objective marker. And now with our Halloween spookler complete, the warband at long last is assembled. While for most hobbyists, this is where the painting process would start. However, there is one last crucial step before the acrylic onslaught can begin. Of course we couldn't pass this step up, for the grunge must floweth. For this process, you will first need some brushes to be sacrificed upon the altar of creativity. These are my war-weary veterans who, while begging for death, continue to serve me faithfully. For our devilish concoction of dirt and grime, I am going to be using the following. For our Vallejo duo, we have thick mud and earth texture, and from Citadel, mordant and agrellan earth, typhus corrosion, and lastly, astrogranite debris. My general process begins with both the Vallejo products, but primarily Vallejo's thick mud. I stipple a small amount at a time on any robes or cloth that would have picked up mud or debris on the warband's journey to Mordheim. You want just enough to register as bits of muckiness, so don't cake this on. Remember, work in small controlled areas. You could do the same thing with the astrogranite debris paint as well. I find that mixing and matching both Citadel and Vallejo products to be most effective. From here, I come in with the Mordant Agrellan Earth combo. I focus primarily on the sections of robes that I want to look worn or where the fabric is tearing. I build each layer up slowly, shocking the paint with the hairdryer between applications. I do the same with the Agrellan Earth, however, due to the smaller crackling effect, I like to not only use it on the robes and leather bits of the model, but also on the weapons and armor or anything that is collecting rust or falling apart. Again, work small, slow, and methodically. Lastly, I use the typhus corrosion on any area with rust or where I want to blend the Grell and Earth effect. The key with pre-weathering is you don't want to overdo it, but you also don't want to make it look like you didn't do anything. Last bit of advice, work asymmetrical. The application should be random. Uniformity is immersion breaking. Turn off your brain and just let the process take you on a journey. Don't overthink it. If you go a little overboard with any of these steps, no worries. That miniature is just grimier than his fellows. Recenter yourself and continue. After the weathering, this was the outcome. Now I know the models look like absolute hell, but when you throw on some primer with a nice zenithal highlight and crank some black metal, this is what you're left with. The warband is ready for paint, and thus ends our kit-bashing journey. I hope you all gained some insight into the Mordheim ecosystem and were inspired to start your own warband. Now, it is no secret that I've been MIA for a while. Unfortunately, real-life priorities have to be treated as such. I also value your time, and I didn't want to put out something that I felt wasn't deserving of it. Hopefully, the wait was worth it. For your extreme patience, I want to say a behemoth-sized thank you to all my beautiful subscribers here, and a massive salute to all my Patreon and Subscribe Star supporters. Shout out to our Gears and Militant Mama. I'm going to be trying out some different ideas with my support links so you all feel like you're getting the most bang for your buck. So what's next? Well, our sinister journey has only just begun. With Halloween right around the corner, the Cult of the Possessed needs to look their best. Part 2 is on deck and right around the corner. Until then, dear viewers, I'm Inquisitor Nero, and Godspeed on your journey into the Grimdark.